everyone, and welcome to another series of Let's Connect. My name is Tuwela Mukosa, and I just want to say that no matter where we are in the world, we all experience the same opportunities and challenges in the workplace. The Let's Connect webinar was actually created to help you navigate those same challenges and opportunities that you face in the workplace. We get to hear diverse opinions from our connectors and our guests, and from people who join us from all over the world that share their insights in our chat. Let's Connect happens on the first Wednesday of every month. It happens at 6 to 7 p.m. South African time, and 5 to 6 West African time and British Standard Time. So before I introduce our guests and they introduce themselves, just a little bit of housekeeping. It is a webinar, so you won't be able to speak. However, we do encourage you to engage with our panelists, whom we typically refer to as our connectors. So please, if you've got any questions that you have for them, please post them in the Q&A section. And if you want to share any of your experiences with us, please, by all means, place that in the chat. We also have our social media pages, which we will be sharing in the chat a little later during the discussion, where you can also get more information on the various topics that we talk about on Let's Connect. So without any ado, and before I hand over to our panelists, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Ladybug Consulting, and Ladybug Consulting by Technologies Africa, and Emmanuel Imafidon and Leah Moyo Motupwa, who in the background, without all these people and collaborators, we won't be able to host this webinar series on a monthly basis. So without me talking too much, I'd like to introduce our first connector, and that's Shola. Shola, if you could kindly introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shola Bomi Oreaba. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I work in the utility space, utilities and gas space, group of companies where we try and solve the Nigerian eclectic power issues one day at a time. I'm passionate about policy development and governance, and I'm excited to be part of this session that we do every month. And thank you guys for taking time out to join this. Looking forward to an interesting conversation.
Thanks, Shola. Kanye?
Good evening, everyone. Kanye Mdluli. It's so good to see you again. And I'm excited to be back. I'm recovering from COVID, so excuse my energy if it's slightly different today. But all in all, I'm doing well and I'm recovering very nicely. A little bit about me. I'm a project director currently with Duke CE, where we bring exceptional bespoke development programs to life with a great team. And my background prior to that, I worked as a director and co-founder of BLK Recruitment and Coaching, as well as Ladybug Consulting. I'm a seasoned leadership and career coach, and I take great care and I feel strongly about making people the very best of who they can be. I am driven, forward-focused, and very much about making a difference.
Thank you, Kanye. I just want to say, guys, if you did notice on the poster that we had Leah Moyo joining us, unfortunately she had a personal matter she needed to attend to. Kanye was gracious enough to come back and host this series. She wasn't well, but she's been brave enough to come back. So I just want to say thank you, Kanye, for stepping up and keeping the team together. So thank you. I'm Tuwela Mukosa. I'm co-founding CEO of an IT firm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm passionate about people development, especially working with women in ICT. I'll just hand over now to our wonderful guest, Buhle Benkosi. Please, Buhle, please introduce yourself.
Well, it's just great to be here, and I'm just a lover of people. I love facilitating growth. That's what I live for. Uh, that's my career, literally. I refer to myself as God's special work in progress because, in as much as I have worked many years in corporate sectors, I've grown a lot. I'm still growing. And because of that, I'm work in progress. So anything that I'm sharing with you today, any questions that I might give answers to, is based on that wealth of experience and absolutely wanting to hear your story and how we can work to move you to your next level. I call myself the career chef because I'm absolutely passionate about people and their careers.
So thank you so much, guys. I just want to say tonight's topic has really created a lot of buzz on social media when we were advertising, and it's a very delicate topic. So I just want us to get right into it. So today's topic is navigating a toxic workplace environment. And due to our different levels of tolerance and compromise, I would like to ask, maybe I'll start with you, Kanye. What is the meaning of toxic environment to you?
Oh man, I wasn't hoping to go first, but that's okay. What does toxic mean? For me, it's where it's incongruent with me, what's important for me, and there's an inconsistency around how I get treated, how others get treated, the role that creates in how we work together. And also, I think more importantly, it's around how I'm left feeling when I interact with that environment. So if I'm tired and stressed and wake up and I'm not excited about going to work, there's a reason why. And to some extent, I think that may touch on toxicity. And I'm curious to know how other people feel about it. But my energy levels always tell me it's a sign that something is not right.
Okay. Shola, what does the word even toxic? What is your definition of toxic? How would you define it?
Toxic as a word is that thing that just makes me want to fight. So out of my comfort zone, I don't want to be here. That thing that just tells me this is not good for my aura. But yeah, so a toxic workplace for me is that environment. So I know we talk about being authenticity a lot, and it's that place where I just cannot be my authentic self to start with. So again, as we continue to find the link with our conversations from the top, I think that's where one part that I think that links to everything we've been saying, where you can be your authentic self. But basically, in a toxic workplace is an environment that just negatively affects your well-being. So it's causing you stress, it's causing you anxiety, it's causing you worry. And yeah, and there are different causes of it, or they manifest in different ways. But it's toxic environment. And again, toxic environments. There are toxic moments and there are toxic environments. So there's somewhere work can just be stressful at this time, and you know that this too shall pass and things are back to normal. But that toxic environment is just that environment or workplace that just you don't want to get up in the morning. You see a message from your phone and your heart sinks literally, and you're like, oh my God, what's going on? But yeah, that's what a toxic environment to me means to me. That place that causes you stress and doesn't allow you to be your authentic self. You can't express yourself, and it just gives you worry. Every time you think about it, you're stressed out, anxiety.
So Bushle, just following on to what Shola is talking about, she's mentioned a few characteristics of a toxic environment. Bushle, in your experience, how can someone recognize that they're in a toxic environment?
So for me, the first thing that would make me realize that I'm in a toxic environment is when I really have to move from who I am, but in a very negative way, in a very uncomfortable way, in a way that leaves me doubting my own capabilities, my own abilities, my own integrity. It is some of the flags that I see is how people are treated. If you go into an environment that is that doesn't have a lot of respect for each other, respect for opinions, a very tell culture. So you employ professionals, but you want to tell them all the time how to do their job. Another toxic flag for me is where gossip is encouraged at the workplace. It's not dealt with. People just feel comfortable to talk about other people, and it's normal. That's a second flag. A third flag for me also is then the kind of work that I, as a professional, am given to do. If it very often falls outside of my scope, so I'm not being upskilled, I'm being downskilled, if I can call it that way. So those for me are some of the flags. But I guess the biggest flag for me is how I am treated as a professional versus what my understanding of how I should be treated is. And it's erring on the negative side. So those for me are some of the flags.
You've touched on scope of work. We talked about authenticity, where we're getting anxious when we at work. And for me, I think it comes around the levels of tolerance or compromise that we as individuals have. Kanye, I don't know if maybe you have got something to share on how you recognize a toxic environment. How have you identified it? And once someone identifies it, when do you think they should stay, or when do you think they should leave?
That's a big question, and it's very personal for all of us because of our life circumstances. So I'll start with the reinforcing the red flags. For me, it's where there's an incongruency with my values and what's important for me. So if, for example, walking into an organization, knowing that work-life balance is not something that is important for that organization. And I walk in there and I have expectations of there being a work-life imbalance or balance rather, or some sort of equilibrium. I'm being unrealistic, right? I knew going in that's an expectation. So it's a decision I would have made. But if I get there and my mother falls ill, and I happen to mention that my mother's ill, firstly, the organization doesn't recognize it. Secondly, there's an expectation that I'm going to continue to perform at my peak. Thirdly, no one even checks in to see how I'm doing or how my mother's doing, and this is affecting my performance. And now we're having performance conversations. For me, there's a level of toxicity, and I'm using an extreme example there. But I think the critical red flags are where and then there are colleagues who are having family members who are not well and they get treated very differently, right? For me, there's an inconsistency there. and that inconsistency is creating a negative experience for me. And the likelihood is I'm not going to feel great about that workplace. So already we're bordering on a toxic work environment for myself. So anything that feels completely out of sync with who I am, I think both Shola and Bushle spoke about it. You know, if it's making me question my values or the way they do things doesn't align with who I am, it's bordering on toxic. How we communicate, you know, that's a big one. I think Bushle spoke very aptly and articulately about it, you know, how we treat people and how we leave them feeling. I'm a professional. I love this analogy. One of my colleagues from a previous workplace used to say this, you know, you're a Ferrari and you get put on a dirt road and expected to perform at your peak. That doesn't work. That for me is toxicity, right? So I'm a professional, I'm hired to think, and you get told what to do and how to do it. That also is a flag around toxicity. And if you feel like you can't really be yourself in that workplace, I think Shola also spoke about that, it's another red flag for toxicity. So you've now identified it for yourself. There are markers, I think, that, you know, are universal around toxicity, and you'll feel it. I've said this a few times. I'm a big energy person. If my energy is off, there's something going on there, and it's worth understanding what it is. And then I'm empowered to make a decision about where to next. So what do you do now that you've identified it? Now, we come from different backgrounds and our priorities are different and our circumstances are different, you know. I may need the money more than, you know, how I'm feeling matters. And that's wrong, but that's where I'm at right now. I need the money. So, or I've got families that I need to take care of, or I've got, you know, commitments beyond just the income. So I can't just walk away. I've identified that there is an issue, and I can do one of a couple of things, maybe three things. The first one is find. Sorry, Bushle, did you say something?
No, sorry.
So I've identified that there's an issue, so I may want to consider an alternative place of employment and start that journey. And whether that means, you know, I'm on a job search or I'm networking or I'm finding things to do outside of that environment that keep me motivated while I find something that, you know, will be more aligned with who I am, that's an approach I would take as an option. The second option is I've identified that there are certain characteristics or individuals or things that are happening in the workplace, and this is a hard one for me because, and I remember saying this in our prep session, you either are going to be the martyr, so you're going to stand up and you're going to say something, or you're going to do something and you'll get shot down, and you must be brave enough to firstly stand up and say something and try to do something, and maybe you'll be victimized, maybe you won't, it depends on the environment, or you'll do nothing and say nothing and suffer in silence. And that's a decision you'll need to make as you navigate this journey. So I'm going to leave it there because I know there's a wealth of experience around this topic, and I'd love to hear from other people.
Great. Before we go, Shola, in our briefing session, you talked about career advancement and how, I just want to build on to what Kanye said, to say, you know, sometimes you know that this is a toxic workplace environment, but you stay because you feel like you will get the experience and it's a career advancement. Can you maybe just elaborate a bit more on that? You had some examples from the Nigerian perspective.
Yeah, so in a toxic, so a lot of times, and I think for context, sometimes it depends on where you are in your career. So at the start of your career, you're for lack of better word, happy, or for lack of ignorance, you're ignorant to what's available out there, what the life expectations are. So you go into a place where it is literally toxic, because there's no way that you're crying in the bathroom every day and you do not recognize that is toxic. But one of the things I think is that people think that it's a rite of passage. So when I go through this, I come out tougher, and then the ladder for my career advancement, I'm just going to start climbing because I've put in the work, or I've put in, because I can't call it work. I've put in I've earned, I have earned my stripes, because I've gone through the boot camp. So now I'm going to start climbing. And we see that, so in Nigerian context, where you go into the bank, I think it happens mostly in the bank, you see that the part of the whole thing is the newbies. So the new entrants, they're supposed to be there all day. They're supposed to, do you have people, coming out on them? You see people crying every day, and like, why is still there? But a lot of times people don't know better. It's basically that I'm going through the rite of passage, and once I go through this phase, and then I'm now at that level, that I'm going to do it to the people that are coming after me. So it then becomes a culture as well. So outside of it just being a toxic, because sometimes it's a group of people, just a boss that creates a toxic environment. In the situations like this, it's now become a culture. So where it's been done to me, I'm going to move up, and then I'm going to do it to people below me. So that then even turns to bullying. In hindsight, if I think about it, I think it's bullying. But again, it's for people, it's that rite of passage. I'm starting my career. I don't imagine that someone at a certain level will go into a workplace where they make you cry. So you've, say, 10 years experience. You get a job and you have to go cry in the bathroom. I don't think that on a good day, anyone will sit and stick through that. But I think it's important to be clear that it's a lot of times where you are in your career. And also just because I've seen people, by the way, I've seen people realize that this is not me. I've turned into a mean girl. So even at that young age, people saying, no, I'm leaving this bank. I can't do this, because, you then start, by the time you're 3 years in and you have people below you and you start being that mean girl as well, or mean guy as well, you realize that I don't want to be that person. So people also recognize that. But I think that for that context, and for what I see a lot in my environment, or where I am, is at the beginning of the career, where you start your career matters. It defines some of these things, and how you accept it, or how you deal with it. And again, for me, I keep using an example of early on in my career. I was interviewing at banks, and one bank that the job description really fitted what I wanted to do, which was not just core banking and just marketing. The HR person kept calling at odd hours, and that was a red flag for me. Like, if you're human resources, you're dealing with people, why are you at work at 9 p.m.? But yes, those are the kind of things that, or having to interview on a Sunday afternoon, like, are you in the office? So yeah, picking on the red flags and quickly realizing these issues is very key.
I just want to touch on the culture part. Bushle, in your 3 definitions of recognizing a toxic environment, you mentioned gossip. And I think that is a very big red flag that people need to understand, that gossip actually creates a toxic workplace environment. And sometimes we get into the whole, enjoying listening to the stories, but we're actually contributing. Maybe if you can expand for us, Bushi, on the gossip part, the culture, and how that can manifest into a toxic workplace environment.
Okay, so I'm going to split even that into 2 parts. The first part is the environment. the environment that allows certain behaviors to perpetuate. One of those behaviors is gossip. People are just too comfortable to talk about people's personal lives, as an example. People are comfortable to judge people. So that in itself is not healthy. That is an environmental issue. And you would need a different strategy to deal with an environment. Remember, an environment is not easy to change. So if you're recognizing that in your environment, this is when you might think, is this the place that I need to be at? And because an environment is not easy to change, you are going to need a different strategy as opposed to when you are recognizing a toxic person. So there's different strategies to deal with toxic people, like setting your boundaries, like giving people feedback immediately when somebody comes and gossips about the boss. I am not that person. Please move on or find a way to opt out of it so that you are not a part of it and it also becomes your norm. Because if we are gossiping about you, about the boss today, that same person will be gossiping about me somewhere else tomorrow. So cut it off. So give people feedback immediately in the moment. I don't do the set the boundaries and stick to the boundaries. Don't keep pushing the people boundary. So if you are not a person who's going to gossip, if you are not a person who's going to take credit for other people's work, because that's also another sign of a toxic environment. If you are not that person, the minute you see it, find a way to call it so that even if you are left standing alone, you are standing on your authenticity, you are standing on integrity. The environment requires a different approach in my mind. And this is, if I am staying, what actions can I take to minimize the impact of this toxicity that I am around? As Kanye said, sometimes you can't leave. And I don't think anyone, well, very few people go in with a plan of leaving. So when you start employment, it's not your plan to leave immediately. So you need a different strategy around that. What are the things that I can do to minimize this toxicity? So what is the toxicity? Is it the kind of work? Is it the way that I'm being treated? Is it just the environment, the culture of lack of respect, of lack of accountability, lack of trust, lack of transparency? What is it? Define it for yourself. And again, you go through the same process. What is going on here? What is my tolerance level at that? What do I need to change? I'm a strong believer that I can shift. I always say I can shift things to work for me. It's not easy, it's hard, but I definitely can. Sometimes it's as simple as I see that environment and I know that I'm not going to be here in the next 6 months. So if I'm not going to be here in the next 6 months, what are the actions that I need to start doing? And this is what Kanye was talking about, that maybe now I start building firmer relationships with recruitment agencies. Maybe I look up and see, oh, okay, maybe I can be in this organization, but in a different team. So shift, you can see which way you can do it. Shift your environment within where you are, or shift it out. But that's it's not like a snap decision. You really need to sit down and think about it, because there will always be things that are at risk if you just take a quick action. Some of us are that brave. Some of us have decided, it's done, it's finished. I'd rather be in the streets. This I'm not going to stand for. And there are a few individuals who are like that, and it works for them. You also need to know who you are and how you deal with difficult things in general, because a toxic environment is but one of the things that will challenge you. It's not everything. So how do you deal with difficulties in general and bring that experience to bear at the workplace and see how you shift yourself?
I like that. I think you've opened up another avenue, because we're talking about the environment, but then you also mentioned people, because sometimes you might find the environment is fine. It's just that it could be just one person or
Yes.
a team, and you're in
Yes.
this team, or this one person is really antagonizing you. Now,
Mm.
how do you deal with this one person? I like what you said about setting boundaries and sticking to it. But sometimes there are people who overstep those boundaries. So maybe, Kanye, do you have any tips for how to deal with a person rather than the environment? A toxic person in the workplace.
Sure. Now we are, broaching a very broad topic around, dealing with, for example, narcissistic personalities.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go there. What I will do is primarily focus on knowing your own triggers and how you then handle and relate as a result. So being self-aware is always going to be important. You know what gets you off, you know what makes you feel a particular way, and you know how you typically respond when you are triggered, right? I think I came across a concept called the amygdala hijack. I see Kuma's on the line. Maybe she can also share some thoughts on that. But when you're triggered, you literally have something like 3 seconds to respond. And that's in an instant, right? So it's very important to know what to do when you're triggered. Your freeze, flee, fight response is immediately activated when you're triggered. So you're either a fighter, or you're gonna flee, or you're gonna freeze. So it's important to know that about yourself, and therefore how you best respond to circumstances when triggered. But if it's consistently making you feel a particular way, for me, the important thing, I think it depends on the dynamic and the relationship. If it's the boss, if it's a colleague, if it's a subordinate, because you can get triggered from everywhere. I try by all means, it's not always successful, to know the boss's agenda. And I've spoken about this before. What makes them tick, what makes them excited, what makes them want to behave in a particular manner, and the time taken to get to know that and learn that is important, because then you know how to relate to that individual. And it's not, like I said, something that will happen instantaneously, and you need to invest the time. So do get to know them, and then see how to navigate. And again, I love that we're reinforcing things that we've learned before in previous conversations, but also understand, have an unofficial board. You need to have an unofficial board to help you navigate, because some of these things you'll have experienced yourself. I mean, when I first moved from consulting into corporate, there were things I didn't know, that unconscious incompetence around corporate politics, because consulting politics are very different when you get into a corporate. So speaking to people who can guide you, who can help you navigate, the typical things for me are knowing people's interests, knowing their agenda, knowing whether you can support that or not support that. And if you can't support that, and like Bushle said, this horse is bolted, it's no going back, I'm out. Knowing that you have a plan to do that. I would never encourage anyone to just quit without options, but I know there are people who reach that place. So when you've reached that place, always try and have a network of people who can support you. I remember reading somewhere that if you have, you need different kinds of relationships in your life. You need people who are going to loan you money, because as an entrepreneur, that day is going to come. You need people who are going to support you and guide you and coach you, because that day is always there where you need their guidance, and mentors and friends and sounding boards. I always say to my friends, this person's going to drive me crazy. Can I come and vent to you so that I am sane tomorrow? And they absolutely. So pick your battles, and things like that are important. But toxicity is not something you can always escape. I think if the leadership of the organization doesn't see it, doesn't identify it, doesn't care for it, you need to make brave decisions for yourself around whether that is the right place for you or not.
Shola, do you have anything to add on to what?
Yeah. So especially around kind of the part where having the conversation and knowing, especially when it's coming from a boss. So I'm just going to give my example of what I went through and how I dealt with it and how that ended. Okay. So I had a boss. So the first thing first, I think it's important for me where I'm in a place to be able to I think being vulnerable, being allowed to be vulnerable in the workplace is very important. Now as an executive, I preach it. I try and make sure that, because that's how people grow. And it just helps reduce tension, anxiety, and all those things that we speak about. But yes, I had a boss who was great during, so again, there were no red flags. There was nothing to pick on. We had conversations, interviewed, got the job, all was well. And suddenly it's just always one thing or the other. Like, oh, can you look at this before I send it out? And you get a response with 5 question marks. In my mind, I'm like, you've never seen these things before. You hear other people talking about toxic bosses, and I'm like, well, what does that mean? What does question marks mean? Is it responding to something? Like, but yeah, again, just loads of things like that. And I had a conversation. For me, it was to Kanye's point, where can we align? What is the boss's agenda? In this case, a boss. And there's a conversation like, guy, what's going on? We're on the same team. So why this back and forth is not going to do anyone any good? If you're on the same team, what's the issue? And I was like, oh, well and good. But anyways, long and short is, for me, the things that triggered me, that caused my stress, was I found that in every conversation that I had outside of work, I was talking about work. Like, how does that make sense? Where I'm talking about work every single conversation. In fact, I'm praying, and my prayers, I find that I'm praying about that my boss is not having a bad day, or that work goes well on this day. So that's a big trigger for me. And for me, I just started planning my exit strategy. And one day I couldn't deal, and I fled. So this was a flight one for me. Tried to fight, it didn't work. And then my mind was, because it was new to me. Again, some people have gone through it and they find ways around it. I try to create boundaries. I try to do work-life balance where outside of work, but you find that 2 a.m. you're dancing in the club and your phone, you get a message and your day is done. Literally done at 2 a.m. Who sends messages at 2 a.m. Knocking you off? But yes, basically, that's my personal story. And yeah, I fled. I don't know that I know how to deal with it, but people do. And I think that's what this conversation is supposed to be about. How do you navigate it? What do we do? Now, as an executive, I recognize toxic people. I do. And I make sure that I'm able to separate them and call people out, or just try and find a way where you start pushing people out and they feel like they are, what's the word? Anyway, they're not the norm. So this is the group, this is what we are trying to do, and you're the outcast. So fix yourself, and if you can fix yourself, you shift out. But recognizing it and making sure that the people around you are comfortable.
Wow, thanks so much, Shola, for actually being vulnerable and sharing that story with us. I'm sure people will resonate and learn from that. I just want us to quickly go to Q&A. We've got 20 minutes remaining. So I would like us to address the questions that are coming from our attendees. So I want to start this one. I'm going to direct to you, Bushe. So how does one, it comes from Anonymous, and it says, how does one know they are contributing to this toxic environment?
My personal experience was two things. Firstly, people felt comfortable to come and talk to me about everything that was bad in that organization. And because I'd had the same experiences, I opted out of taking a leadership role in that. So I also then became problem-oriented instead of solution-oriented. So how do you know you're being toxic? When somebody comes to you with a problem, you sit 50 days in the problem, no solution coming. You are already contributing to toxicity. So I don't say people shouldn't come and talk to me, but when they do come and talk to me, can that also be an opportunity for me to lead, to guide, to shift things for all of us in the organization and be a little bit more positive around the organization. So for me, that was a realization. The other realization that I had, I was actually told by my CEO that I don't think you realize the amount of influence you have. And I didn't. I just became a part of the run of the mill in that organization. And I was lucky enough to have somebody who recognized in me that you actually have so much influence. You need to find a way to channel this so that you're not contributing to the toxicity of the environment. So what can you do when people come to you and talk to you? Try and shift the conversation. What can we do? Because we all want to work here. We all want to be in a positive environment. What can you and I do? Even if it's not 400 people, what can you and I do? And get that conversation going rather than, yes, really, they don't pay us. If they pay us, they don't pay us on time. If they pay us on time, it's not what was. Hey, the stories just do not end. Do you know what that boss did? It doesn't get us anywhere as professionals. So I just watch the conversation. That for me is already a flag. Watch the conversation. Remember also, we are at work to work. We are colleagues. I don't say let's not develop the friendships. Absolutely, we'll develop the friendships. But the thing that brought us together is to advance ourselves in our careers and advance the goals of that organization. So a quick test for me, this conversation, is it building me? Is it building this organization? Those for me are quick tests. Yeah.
Love that. And I also think, I think Kanye and Shola mentioned it, just being self-aware. How am I contributing to this environment? So I think we definitely need to be self-aware. Another thing that I want to ask is, I'll direct this one to Kanye. What are the things one can do to make sure they don't become toxic while working in a toxic work environment?
I think it's so easy to assimilate because you know that will help you survive an environment that doesn't align with your personal values or your beliefs or things you hold dear. So one thing you need to be very aware of and mindful of is that you're not assimilating. So I think Shola spoke about this. She articulated it so well, and that's something I'm always mindful of when I join an organization is you know who you are, and you get then told when you arrive that this is how we do things here, and then immediately it starts, it jars with you. And you stay long enough, you're going to start behaving like them. The likelihood is because, like it's like a fish swimming upstream. You're fighting against a very strong current. Now, for me, the big thing is if the leadership buys into this very necessary shift of an organization that doesn't treat its people fairly or is not consistent or is not, looking from a people perspective at how we grow people and how we, enhance and grow this organization, then there's a challenge. So if your leadership doesn't buy into it, it's also just being mindful about how you protect yourself. And I think Buhle spoke about that very, very clearly and very well. How else do you make sure you're not yourself toxic? I think there's something to be said around how you leave people feeling. They don't have to tell you that you leave them feeling a particular way. You can just see how people respond to you. And having been a boss myself, where I was running my own organization, I tried so hard to just tap into where people are. So regular check-ins with people were important for me. And when someone started avoiding those check-ins, I'd need to ask the question, what's going on? And part of that is asking yourself, what am I doing to contribute to this? And when things are stressful, when money's not coming in, when you're getting pressure from the top, the saying, toot flows downhill. When the toot lands on you and now you're passing on the toot to the next person, you need to check yourself. And so it's just about being aware of what is it that's shifting around me and how am I contributing negatively to that. And, I don't think we're all inherently bad people, even narcissists. I don't think we're inherently bad people. And I think when you're doing something that's affecting other people negatively. So Bushe touched on things that we need to be aware of. Gossip is a big one. The other is how we communicate inconsistently, and not in a way that, I'm treating talent differently, but in a way that's making it seem like there's a preference, and that preference is driven by something that no one can quite articulate. So that's another trigger. Are you that person, and are you behaving in a way that's not helpful? And I thought there was a beautiful check that she said you must, an acid test of sorts that you must do that says, is this growing me? Is this growing the next person? Is this growing the organization? Then why am I doing it if it's not? So it's important to know if you're doing that acid test, then your answer is no to all three, actually, to any of them and all three, you are adding to the toxicity. And guys, it's important to have, whether it's family, whether it's friends or colleagues, you yourself change, and they can see it, and they will tell you you are different. And when you start feeling different, or you start engaging differently, or people are starting to tell you you're different, you need to know that there's something that's going on for you that's not helping you. And you do take this home. You do, when I'm frustrated, I take it home. I start behaving in a way that's incongruent with who I've been and I've always been. So it's just important to know those things, because the likelihood is it's contributing to creating a very unhealthy environment. And if you're the leadership and your people are telling you something's wrong and you're not listening, you're part of the problem.
Amen. Thanks for that, Kanye. Shola, there's a question here that says, why would one care about a toxic environment if they deliver the goals and the tasks? So it sounds to me like Anonymous is a deliverer, they meet all their goals, and they're in this toxic environment. They've identified it. So why should they care?
It obviously doesn't bother them or doesn't affect them if you're delivering, and that because you delivering on your job is not a measure of the level of toxicity of the environment that you're in. They're not the same thing. They're not correlated. So if you do not care about it, that means that it doesn't negatively affect you, which means you're good. That means there's no issue. Because I don't know that it's if I'm delivering and somebody is talking down on me or being rude to me, or except it's affecting other people. So if they're not, the toxicity doesn't reach you, you're fine. If it's let me say, if you're witnessing it and it doesn't, or you're the one that getting maybe say preferential treatment, and the toxicity is focused on other people. If you're fine being able to, suck it up and look the other way again, that's good. That's no judgment here. But I think that as long as you're able to be authentic and you're comfortable in yourself, and you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm good. I think that question is actually because delivering and being in a toxic environment, I don't know that I can say that because you're delivering doesn't mean that you'll be shielded or protected from a mean boss or whatever form the toxic environment takes. That's how I say it. So not sure that I can. I don't know if someone else has another angle to it, but
yeah, Shola. I do want to say when I look back in my career, one thing that I've realized at the workplace, anything that is happening to a colleague of mine has the potential to happen to me.
Exactly.
Yeah. So whether I am achieving now, it's a season. It won't always be like that. It's a season. So this talks then to how do I influence change? Because I don't want that toxicity to land up on me. At some point, I don't want it at some point to start affecting my performance and my delivery the way it is affecting somebody else. So when it's summer for you, the leader in you must say, how do I start to shift things while I have the energy? Because some of my teammates no longer have that energy. And remember, generally, when you are performing, we don't look too much at the softer things because the hard things are there. But also remember that toxicity in the long run will affect performance. It absolutely will, because you start to doubt yourself, you start to get depressed, you are unsure, the things you no longer know. And it's only a matter of time before it spreads in an organization. So you're insulated for a while. Yes, you will deliver. But if it's an environment thing, the longer you are in that environment, it's going to flip over to at some point. Yeah.
Sure.
I would also add a little bit to say maybe you are a contributor because you're just keeping quiet and not really like you're influencing the change in the environment by just keep on delivering and not really acknowledging that there is that form of toxic environment that I'm working in. Yeah. Now, Bushle, I actually want to ask this. It's coming from Tambi Karima, and there was another question from Dan Mokosa. They're all asking around what questions can one ask in an interview to determine if that workplace is toxic.
That's a very interesting one. That's a very interesting one. One question that pops out immediately is to understand the rate of turnover in an organization.
Yes.
That already is absolutely could be a whole host of reasons why the turnover is high. But I'm also a firm believer that turnover is an indicator of some problem in an organization. So I would ask a question around turnover. If not in the organization, then definitely in this specific role that I'm going into, I would ask around the team. I would ask around what strengths, what can I contribute into this team? And I also always say, when you ask questions, whatever question you're asking in an interview, watch the body language. Very often when it's two people, the body language tells you a whole host of things more than people will actually say. When you ask, so what was maybe what was one of the most recent challenges the team has had to deal with, and say, yeah, I was. That's already telling you. Yeah? There's a story behind that.
Yes.
So it's questions around turnover. It's questions around the incumbent of that role. What are some of the things that I could do differently? It will already tell you when they are expecting someone to walk on water. Able. Only one man ever did that. So when you ask around the turnover, you ask around the incumbent, you ask around the team dynamics, you ask around leadership style. They'll tell you, hi, you don't ask, you just do. There you go.
Can I add to that, Toa?
Yes.
I feel strongly about asking a couple of questions that I just think are red flags, depending on what you hear. What is the culture like? And the minute you ask about culture and you hear words like we are high performing, there isn't an organization that isn't high performing. Everybody goes into business to make money. And to make money, there are practices that you need to employ. Therefore, there's everybody to a large extent, unless if you work for a not-for-profit, who is high performing and wants to do the absolute best that they can. So words like that make me very nervous. When people say things like, don't come here for the money. We all work, want to be rewarded for the work that we do. And to a large extent, we also want to be paid what the market is prepared to pay. So if you say that to me, especially if you say both those things in the same conversation, it means you want to overwork me and underpay me. There's also something around, what is it about this, or what makes this organization tick? And these are just words I use. You can have your own, choice of words. What makes this organization tick? What makes it, work? What works well together? And then you hear people say things like, we are committed to, and whatever they're committed to. If it starts to err on something that's very uncomfortable for you, you must understand that this is not the right place for you. And then most recently, that unofficial board that I spoke about, it's important I personally reach out to people who work for the organization before the interview. I will hit them up on LinkedIn and tell me about the organization. What is it like? What is the culture like? And people don't know you, so they tend to be a little bit more honest. Or even in their diplomacy, you can pick up certain things. So I think it's important to do your homework and not just around, their ethos, their value, the stuff they put on their website. I think it's important to understand from people who work in the organization what their experience of the organization is like. So you will hear things like, Black people don't survive here. And you ask yourself why. Or there's a glass ceiling. Or look at the executive. You don't even need to ask. Look on Exco. People like to say who we are, and then they put things like that up. So have a look at that. And if you feel strongly about growth and trajectory as a Black woman, and you see no examples of Black women doing anything in that organization, it is a red flag. So I think it must very much be aligned with who you are and what it is you're trying to achieve for yourself, and then test the environment for that. But I love what Bushe was saying about, what is the leadership like?
We've got 4 more minutes till we end, and we still have 8 open questions that are in the Q&A, and there's also content coming in from the chat. But I think maybe just to end, there are 2 questions in here about leadership. One is around you as a leader. How do you know if you are toxic and exerting that toxicity onto your team? Then the other one is around how do I tell my boss that they are creating a toxic work environment? Any tips, any tricks? So maybe to end, Shola, if you can maybe just answer the how can I tell my boss? And then Bushle, if you could close it up for us on you as a leader. How can you identify that you are toxic to your team? But it says, how do you know as a leader if you are toxic or your team is just scared to talk because of other leaders? So maybe Shola, we'll start with you.
All right, so you want me to talk about
how to tell your boss that they're creating, any tips?
Yeah, it's in the moment. I think it's just important where, I'll speak for myself. So it's when you recognize things and you're able to speak to it in the moment. So for a boss, I think an example that comes to mind is 2 things, or maybe a couple of examples, and things that you can quickly pick on. You see someone is uncomfortable and you can pick on it and you can give, so I have examples, clear examples on things that have happened, and you can be specific about. So where you see something happen where maybe a boss speaks to someone and the person is uncomfortable, just be clear on what that example is, and without having to name or shame someone. So you're not you're not putting the person in a further sticky situation. But what I've been able to do are the things that I've found that I've been able to speak on are things around as they've happened in the moment. So at the end of a meeting where someone embarrasses a boss embarrasses someone while speaking, that so can put it up that, oh, that I think what he was trying to say is, but he couldn't speak again after that. So maybe you didn't just understand what he was saying. But yeah, just being able to pick it up exactly in that moment and just pick on people's discomfort in a way that you can articulate it. So where someone who is typically high performing is withdrawing, I don't know, and you have to be observant to be able to see that, or just of his gossip. So if it stems from gossip, people are saying it's important as a leader that you get that kind of feedback. Like Kanye says, feedback is a gift. So you think about it like you're gifting this leader. But I think that examples are always very useful. So where something has happened and you are able to articulate it in the way that you see that it affects things, people are able to act on things where they can relate to it. So we're just going to someone and say that I don't think people are motivated and I don't think things are moving. But where or use myself as an example. And I think that it's causing this, and I think that it's affecting this. It happened to me, but it's affecting other people. But using examples will always be good, and people can visualize things better when you have specifics that you speak to. But again, that's what has worked for me because I think that I'm observant. So where you're able to pin these things is very important to speak up on it.
Thanks. And then Bushle, just to end, it's 7. So maybe if you can just
3 points. I've got 3 points.
Yes, ma'am.
If you are a leader, check how people relate with you. Relate from a fear perspective or from a respect perspective. It's 2 different things. Do people fear you or do people respect you? And then the last one for me always is, check how you deal with your people when they've made mistakes. That is telling of whether you are toxic or you have got a growth mindset. Some of us are successful, I would say, because we were allowed to make mistakes and learn from the mistakes. Are your team members learning from the mistakes they make, and are you enabling that growth? That for me will deal with toxicity from a leadership perspective.
Thank you so much. Ladies, everybody who attended tonight, thank you so much again for joining us. Please join us again next month, first Wednesday of the month, same time. And also please do go onto our social media websites. Please like, please share. We'll be sharing more information about the topics that we've discussed on our social media. So everyone, thank you very much. Thank you to Bushe for joining us. It has been really insightful. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.